Okay, let's kick off. So hello everyone and welcome to today's IAB Europe Industry Insider webinar in partnership with Index Exchange. Thank you very much for joining us. We've got a really great session ahead with a focus on a topic that's becoming more crucial with each passing day: sustainability in the future of digital advertising. Now, to set the stage for the discussion, I'd like to take a moment to reflect on why sustainability is such a critical issue, not just for IAB Europe, but for the entire digital advertising industry. As you know, sustainability is no longer a nice to have, it is a necessity. And as an industry, we must embrace practices that balance growth with environmental and social responsibility. At IAB Europe, we are deeply committed to advancing sustainability across the digital advertising system through our committees and our working groups, and really trying to help companies meet their goals in reducing carbon footprints, increasing transparency, and fostering ethical standards. So today's session is an exciting opportunity to explore the real actionable strategies that can drive meaningful change. We're going to examine how leading companies are embedding sustainability into the heart of their operations and discuss the role that advanced technologies and transparent practices play in shaping a sustainable future for digital advertising. So we're really delighted that Index Exchange has brought a fantastic content lineup for today's session. So first up, we're going to be hearing from KD Jones, who's the SVP Europe at Index Exchange, who will deliver a keynote presentation. And then following that, we'll move on to our panel discussion, where our expert panelists will share their insights on the actions that their organizations are taking to drive sustainability forward. So before we dive in, just a couple of housekeeping points. We are live today, so thank you so much for joining us. And if you have got any questions for the panelists, you can place those into the Q&A box, which is located at the bottom of the webinar interface. And our panel will hopefully address these at the end of their discussion. Also, this webinar is being recorded and it will be available on IAB Europe's website in the coming days. So if you've missed anything or want to revisit the discussion, you'll be able to do so at your convenience. So without further ado, let's get started. And I'm delighted and very pleased to hand over to KD Jones for our opening keynote.
Helen, thank you so much for the warm welcome this morning. We need it here in chilly, rainy London. And thank you everyone for joining. It's great to have you here today as part of our Industry Insider event. I'm really excited to share with you the journey that we've been on at Index Exchange around sustainability. And that's effectively section 2, what we'll be doing through the keynote. And then I'll be joined by some brilliant panelists who will help share some of their perspectives, but also leave us all with some actionable insights from across the industry. So, shall we get started? There are lots and lots of things that we will talk about today, but I think we hope that really what we can take away from today is things that are very actionable. We hope everyone in programmatic advertising, and in fact, across the wider advertising industry, will have takeaways from the session that they can put in place. Our aim is for this hour to be really actionable and not just words. So if we come in, I'd love to just start by sharing a little bit more about me. As we come to this next slide, you'll see this is me in 2007. Hopefully some of the folks on this call already will know me already and will know probably that I'm not a climate expert. I started my career in B2B media after working at the Institute of Physics Publishing in Bristol. In late 2007, I moved to London to be part of the founding team of a new media company focused on ethics and the environment. At that point in time, the emissions trading scheme was just coming to life, and our sort of vision was to communicate to companies at a board level that reducing carbon emissions was good for the bottom line as well as good for the planet. But say the world had sort of other priorities. There was a huge global recession that landed in 2008. And sadly, the startup that I joined went under. And I moved to joining Yahoo just as they acquired Right Media and the sort of era of programmatic advertising was born. So that's a little bit about me. My guess is that you're also perhaps not a climate expert as well if you're joining this session today. So hopefully we can all share some context as well as some of our experiences, both on a personal level, but also at an index level, on the topic of sustainability, because it's a topic where collaboration and not collaboration, sorry, I got that the wrong way around. So collaboration and not competition will ensure the best outcomes for all. And this is why we wanted to bring everyone together today. So as we move ahead into the presentation, I think the world right now feels a little challenging. When we look at everything that's happening, whether that's politically, socially, or economically, the issue of sustainability feels kind of precarious. We know what is happening to our planet is critical, but it can feel like an unchangeable task. It can feel like too big a thing to try to slow down the momentum that's been built, and it can feel out of our control. I think we've also seen examples of companies being called out for greenwashing or for underreporting or for making too big a claim around this topic. And that's sort of scary for each of us as part of the businesses that we represent to figure out, no one wants to be putting themselves and their companies in that position. But I think most businesses today are pivoting to make greener decisions despite that sort of perceived risk. Most companies that we see through the industry and in the wider world are being much more transparent about their environmental impact. I think the commitment to sustainability and to reducing carbon emissions, it's not just a trend, it's a fundamental shift in how businesses are operating and how they envisage their future. I think what can be interesting is really thinking about why advertising is taking such a prominent position when it comes to the environment. Why, when other industries perhaps produce more carbon than us or have a greater impact of our, on our planet, and perhaps could also be doing more, it's clear that advertising is perhaps not the worst culprit in terms of this problem. But we are kind of privileged in that we have a very unique position in society. We're one of the largest industries that really influences wider behavior. And we therefore have a kind of unique opportunity to make a real difference where it comes to driving this necessary change. And so if we've talked a little bit about why advertising, I think what's interesting to come to next is to think about why you should care. And fundamentally, the topic of sustainability is about future-proofing the business that you work in, future-proofing your business. And we tend to think about 5 key pillars for this at Index Exchange. I think the first one is really the long-term environmental impact. Climate change is a critical issue and it impacts absolutely everyone. There's an urgent need to mitigate environmental damage. You only have to watch the news or read the news to understand the changes that are happening to our climate. And we want to ensure a livable planet for future generations. This is not something that's just going to go away. It's a pressing long-term challenge. And it demands action and continuous action from all of us. I think the second point here, regulatory pressures, is one that makes me very nervous seeing on a slide. But here in Europe, we're really used to this. We're used to governments and international bodies taking action that impacts our business. And just as we've seen legislation come into play in other aspects of online advertising, we're increasingly seeing regulations coming into place that require companies to reduce their carbon footprints. These regulations are becoming more stringent with time, and that makes it imperative for businesses to adopt best practice now and to remain compliant and competitive. I think the best lesson we can learn from GDPR is that self-regulation can give businesses more opportunity to control the rules that are implemented. It's much harder for an industry to adjust when regulation is just cascaded down and put in place, and much, much more advantageous if we can act as an industry ahead of time, with self-regulation, with putting in place best practice to make the moves before it is perhaps forced upon us. On the prior slide, we talked a little bit about why the advertising industry. And I think it's interesting to think about how consumer demand is driving sustainability. Today's consumers are more environmentally conscious than ever before. They prefer companies and they prefer to spend their money with brands who are committed to sustainability. This consumer preference is a powerful driving force for brands. Brands push their agencies, and agencies are able to push this throughout the supply chain. And I hope we'll cover much more of that consumer demand piece as we come into the panel. But it's become very, very clear very quickly that brands can really showcase sustainability and ethical practice, and that can drive their brand's growth and help them to stand out. At Index Exchange particularly, I think sustainability is something that comes up as we are actively hiring and scaling our teams, and as we work to retain talent. I'm finding as I'm interviewing people, as we're building our team, that employees are really actively looking for companies who take CSR, corporate social responsibility, really seriously, and they're making it a key part of their decisions as who they want to work for. And so for us, it's a key part in assuring that we can kind of hire and retain the best people in our business. And then the final point, I mean, it's been proven already, but and there are numerous studies on this, but we've seen across multiple industries that pursuing net zero brings significant advantages, whether that's cost savings through energy efficiency, innovation in sustainable products, a stronger brand reputation. And at Index Exchange, it ties really nicely to our long-standing focus around efficiency. So these are the sort of 5 key pillars why we really think everyone should care about sustainability. But I have to say, having just listed those out, it really does feel like a daunting task. And I think that's why I wanted this next slide to show, like, right, as a kid, like, we don't care. We fall over off our scooters, off our trikes, and we get back on. And I think the mission is we've got to start somewhere. We've got to start with our stabilizers on before we are riding a racing bike. It can feel really overwhelming when there's so much of a spotlight on this topic. And there are examples, as I said before, this topic where companies kind of fail somehow or miscommunicate, it gets picked up. But there are ways that you can start to create positive change in your business. And I'd love to move on to share a little bit more about the journey that Index has gone on so far, hopefully as an inspiration. And then we'll hear more from our panel, because we've felt so far that collaboration and shared learning have been keys to our success in this, and we want to spread that wider through this industry. So if we go back a couple of years now, we realized that this was a topic that we needed to tackle. Honestly, I've only been in the business 4 or 5 months. I've seen it in prior companies, but I know at Index Exchange, what started to happen was it started to come up in the RFPs that we see from our buy-side partners. And it was really driven by our buy-side partners in Europe initially. With the launch of AdNet Zero, that sort of started to accelerate the process, and we started to see this coming up even more in those RFPs. With the launch of AdNet Zero, we knew that we needed a sort of seat at the table, but we also were very mindful that we don't have any climate experts on the executive team, and we knew that we needed to start with gathering information. And so we joined a number of industry bodies, we broadened our network, and we knew that it was going to be important to be able to communicate on what we were doing, both internally and externally. But we also knew that the first place to get started was to look at where we were. And I kind of a bit of a sneak preview, but the good news was that we were further ahead than we first thought. So if I come to the next slide, I think we established these key pillars where we could focus in order to make a big difference. And we'll talk at each of these in more detail as we go through, but we looked at our data centers and our usage of energy. We looked at our product and technology. Efficiency has been a core value at Index for a long time. And so I think this was an opportunity to bring that again to the fore. We're here today with the IAB, and so industry collaboration has been really crucial to our journey so far and will continue to be. We looked at our offices and our marketing partnerships, and then we also looked at this fifth pillar of sort of employee support and communications. So coming onto these in a little bit more detail, I think starting with data centers, this was really the first place that we started to look, just because of the huge volume of data that we deal with, we handle every day. It seemed like a sort of obvious place to look. Our data centers are one of our, by far our, biggest costs to our business. And so we ran a full audit to find out the impact that those centers were having and the energy use specifically within those centers. Since that first piece of analysis, we're currently at 93% of the energy use being clean and renewable energy, with 8 of our 10 data centers already at 100% clean and renewable energy. So overall 93%, with a little way to go to get all of those data centers up to that clean and renewable energy usage. So that was a big first step. Secondly, our second pillar was really looking at across all of our wider suite of products and our technology to see what we had in place across everything, really from the bid requests that we're sending out to our DSP partners to how we can make those signals more relevant or more efficient, and how we can generally drive efficiency over time. Through 2021, we rebuilt our entire product architecture from the ground up. This made not only our teams and our code hyper efficient, but the efficiency that we built into the core of our platform as we rebuilt it reduced our power per auction by 40%. And if you think about the volume of auctions that we're running, anything that we can shave off that is, was really phenomenal. And we've been significantly investing in more energy efficient computing to reduce our energy footprint by an additional 20% since then. So we've been making a lot of efficiency changes to our architecture. I mentioned before that collaboration is really key to us here. I think early on in the journey, and even now, it was important for us to find out what we didn't know. And we thought that we can get much, much stronger on this journey by connecting with other people who are on similar journeys. So when AdNet Zero was founded, we initially wanted to be involved, but it was founded just after we'd done our financial planning, and we knew we had to figure out how to kind of get the relevant resources together to be able to be part of it. And so building that business case was really crucial. We were able to look at the number of RFPs that we had asking about sustainability from our customers, from our partners. And because we'd seen such a marked increase in requests, we were able to kind of calculate a monetary value for joining this organization. We kind of made the business case of the sort of opportunity cost. If we didn't act, this would be a loss for our business in future. I talked also so far a little bit about our measurements. Our partnership with 51 Carbon Zero has allowed us to incorporate measurement of our carbon emissions. And so we have 2023 now set as our baseline. And so from here, we can formulate a plan to how we reduce our carbon emissions. It would be negligent as well for me to not talk about the work that we've been doing as part of the IAB working groups, and specifically the IAB Tech Lab. I mentioned that we've been working to become much more efficient through our auction process, and we'll talk in a bit more detail in a couple of slides' time, just about how some of the changes to the OpenRTB protocol have allowed us to be more efficient in the bid requests that we're sending out, and in how we receive the bid response, so that we were able to run those auctions more efficiently. But for us, learning from the best and partnering to ensure that continuous learning process has been really, really important, and something that we strongly advise for people who are also going on this journey. We also started to look at our operations and thinking about our workplaces, right? Coming out of the COVID pandemic, we've been coming back into our office spaces. And so it was important for us to work through the policies and regulations that are in place through our global offices. And we've done some fun things. So I'm taking advantage personally of our Cycle to Work scheme. It encourages everyone to be fit and active, but also to not use carbon as part of their day-to-day commute. And even things like ensuring that there is a lot of active recycling in our offices has helped to make a big difference. But it's clear that the bulk of many companies' emissions fall within Scope 3. Scope 3 is the emissions caused by vendors in your supply chain. And so the best way that we found to decrease these emissions is by putting pressure on our vendors or suppliers to ensure that they are accountable for their emissions. And the beauty of this has been that the supply chain is integrated and interconnected. So with each positive change, everyone benefits. And so we can happily share more details of some of the partnerships that we've made across our marketing events and so on. If that's of interest to anyone, please do get in touch afterwards, because we'd love to share some of the operational differences that have made a difference here. And then as a final fifth pillar, we would be nowhere without our people. And we realized that our workforce could be an untapped resource in fueling this positive change. We've implemented a number of programs like volunteer days, internal resource or interest groups, and so that our employees can kind of feel connected to what we're doing and start to make a difference here. So in this process, we've really realized that effectively good technology and good technology companies can have sustainability at the core of what they're doing, because good technology generally means efficiency, and sustainability is a kind of welcome byproduct of that sustainability. So Index, we've long had a focus on supply path optimization, and partner with premium inventory partners, and that allows us to have effectively lighter tech, less data usage, less carbon emissions. And I think here I just wanted to share two quick examples where having sustainability at the core of what we're doing has come out of our focus around efficiency. So the first example that I'll share is around MFA. So we prohibited made from advertising activity across the exchange. And anytime we see made for advertising sites popping up, we know what normal publisher growth patterns look like. And so anytime we see something that doesn't look right, we're able to cut that off at the node. We believe really strongly that MFA fundamentally is advertising industry that doesn't work. Brands and their agencies don't want to buy it as it doesn't have a positive impact on their campaigns. And so if we can kick that off our exchange, that means less carbon resource being used for poor quality inventory, and we can ensure that brand spend is rooted to premium publishers where it will have an impact for the brand, be wasted bid requests, bid responses. I think the work that we did with OpenRTB 2.6 with the IAB Tech Lab is another innovation that we've been part of leading across the industry. The best example for this is actually in the CTV space, because it allows for something called ad podding, which dramatically reduces the number of bid requests that we have to send out. We ran a study with Publica as the ad server, Index as the SSP, the Trade Desk as the DSP, and Scope 3 measuring the impact. And as we moved over to OpenRTB 2.6, we saw an 84% reduction in the emissions generated from that efficient supply chain. It's more efficient for everyone, from the publisher to the brand, and with better user experience thrown in, because the publisher gets better controls around the ads that sit within that pod. So those are a few practical examples from Index Exchange and a little bit about the journey that we've been on. I'm really keen to dig in now deeper with our panel. So if I think, can ask my panelists to share their video, come off mute, and we can move into some of the questions. Do we have everyone here? It looks like we do. Brilliant. So we have everyone's photo and job title on screen. So I won't ask our panelists to introduce themselves. We will spend time going straight into that actionable content that I've been promising and these insights. And as a first question, I'd love for us to talk a little bit about what sustainability means in the context of the advertising industry, and why do we see it becoming increasingly important? And Manu or Manuela, can I start with you?
Yes, of course. Thank you very much, Katie, and thank you for having me. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. But okay, so for me, is that we know that when we talk about climate change, is the biggest threat that we are facing as modern human being. And what we're seeing is that there is a growing economic but also legislative pressure for company to really provide with a more sustainable future. And this is why we see an increasing or showcasing of sustainable practices, sustainable products, and sustainable process. So within Group M, when we look at campaigns, when we look about designing and delivering campaigns, we look at support these priorities. And we do it in two ways. One is a bit touching on what you said before, is what we can control, which is the energy that we use to power our campaigns. And the other piece is what we can influence. And for me, this is the power of advertising, really influence consumer behavior. And we saw actually a recent study from IPCC where we see that potentially by changing consumer behavior, you can reduce between 40 and 80% on the global carbon emission. So this is super powerful. So to give you a bit of perspective from an agency, if we look at our clients, we see that about 84% of our clients have already net zero targets in place. And if we look at WPP, we included media. So emission from media within our net zero targets. And this was, for me, this is a strong position and industry first, if I'm not mistaken. And what does it mean is that by 2030, we need to cut down, so reduce our carbon emission by half, including media.
I mean, I think that's really powerful to hear. I think we certainly seen that at Index Exchange, that it's through partners like you asking for this in RFPs that it's helped us to start our journey. And I think it's yeah, you're right. That pressure is coming from brands because they see it in consumer behavior. If we've started to talk about that media perspective, I'd love to come on to Helen to perhaps talk a little bit about the that sort of content creation side.
Yeah, thanks, Katie. And Manu, it's really encouraging what you're saying at the media end. From a content production point of view, I suppose what sustainability means for us is two really key things. The first is how we make and produce content, and the nuts and bolts of controlling, mitigating, and reducing our emissions. We are lucky that we now have the Ad Green carbon calculator, and at CNN Create, we are super proud to be in the top 10 agency users. So we are a super user of the Ad Green carbon calculator. And that has really changed how we view our content productions. They also have training that you can do that our team has done. And by starting to really measure where your main emissions are coming from and how to both reduce them and then offset what's essential, you can really make a big impact in terms of how content is being created. On the other side, though, from a more client relationship strategic place, it also is embedded in the framework of how we talk to brands. We are also increasingly seeing sustainability being in those RFPs. And I think that snowball effect from it being a priority for us as a studio as well means that brands that do have it as a focus feel comfortable partnering with us. So there's that kind of early stage conversation in terms of just making sure that the messaging that is in that campaign and in that content is where it needs to be. And I think why it's important is, apart from the obvious reasons, we know our audience cares about it. And if we are incorporating sustainability messaging into our content, then we as a studio have a duty to make sure that we're doing that with integrity, which means that we are also prioritizing it in our operations. So yeah, those are our two kind of focuses, how we make the content and what the messaging is.
And I love that separation of thinking about your users and the people who'll be viewing that content, as well as your own behavior. It's kind of that dual strategy seems to resonate well with what we heard from Manu around how brands are thinking about it and their customers.
Yeah.
Paolo, I'd love to get the publisher perspective here as well, because you also have those dual audiences. You have your own audience, and then you have your brands and agency customers.
Yes, thanks, Katie. Thanks a lot. We think that in Shop People, sustainability is not about a trend. It's about a vision. It's a way to build trust with our clients on the advertising side, but with our readers, that our main value. So it's about to make some concrete actions to face this challenge. Of course, it's a great opportunity to drive a positive change, to unlock new business opportunities in the whole digital advertising ecosystem that may be involving all the players along the chain. As a publisher, we have a mission that is make relevant information accessible to everyone. And sustainability now is one of the most relevant topics to spread, as I said, with the clients, but with our audience too. So I totally agree with Ellen when she said that to incorporate some messages of this kind in our editorial production, it's a key features. We also decided to build up, starting from the scratch, a digital magazine that is called OGA, that is focused on the relation between people and the environment. So it's dedicated to everyone who's trying to face this kind of challenge nowadays. So of course, on my opinion, as a publisher, on the audience side, on the client side, it's a great opportunity, even for all brands that have the power to drive budget and revenues through the market. So I think it's something really important to build up with the cooperation with all the players of the ecosystem.
Fantastic. And I think that segues really lovely in a really lovely way to perhaps Tim, because at Scope 3, you work with many different parts of the ecosystem. So does what we've heard from the panelists so far mirror what you're seeing in the wider industry?
Yeah, I think when it comes down to it, measurement underpins all of this really. And if you can't kind of understand it, you can't control it. And if you can't control it, you can't improve it. So it's really important to be able to measure that. And I think if we'd been having this conversation 12 months ago, I think there would have been a small part of the ecosystem we could have done a good job on. But since then, the industry has come together. I'm sure that 90% of the kind of listeners and viewers of this live stream today have been involved in the global sustainability framework. So to get consensus from a whole industry on an agreed way to measure it, and then actually have the vehicle to be able to roll that out is such a fantastic position to be in. So I think in terms of the importance of that, like measurement is obviously critical, but now at a point where we can actually do that properly is really exciting for the future.
Yeah, well, that perhaps also leads me into something that has been playing on my mind a bit, because we are an industry of magpies, right? One of the best things about this industry is that there is constant innovation. Things are always changing. And so, Helen, perhaps we can start with you. If I can ask the panelists next, how you sort of balance that pressure to adopt new technologies with the need to ensure that any new technology is also sort of aligning with your sustainability goals. Is that something you think about a lot?
Yeah, and I think, Tim, what you were just saying actually is kind of the nub of it, because if we have accurate measurement tools, then we have the ability to track any new technologies that we incorporate and look at what impact they are having. But I would say, and I think you touched on this, Katie, as well in your keynote, that generally in content production over the last 10 to 15 years, new technologies generally have improved efficiency and sustainability because that is good technology. So I'm sure lots of us can remember a classic shoot scene of 500 bottles of water, a stack of call sheets, everyone in cabs. Like it's just not how we do things now. So I think in general, technology, usually by dint of being successful and being well adopted, is improving that side of things. But ultimately it comes down to measurement, as Tim says. Like we couldn't track and measure things the way that we now can. And that gives us the security to know that when we do start changing the process and incorporating new tech, we can look at what that's doing.
I love that. And I love that example, because you're right. When I think of a content shoot, I do think of, you know, an excessive rider with, I want this many packets of this. And that's and I think you shared when we had the prep call a little bit about how you're, you know, when you might still go on a shoot and when you may not. Like, how do you evaluate that sort of thing?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think in some areas of advertising, technology maybe is one of the biggest things to manage. I think in content production, it's almost creativity is almost the biggest challenge that we have to manage. I think one thing that has changed a lot in terms of shoot attendance is that 5-10 years ago, it was a little bit risky to suggest to a client that 80% of your crew would be local. Everybody felt much more comfortable sending a very well-known and experienced crew from somewhere that we're used to working abroad to film. And I think that has completely changed. And it really is as standard now that you would kind of send your director, your producer, you might send your DOP, but you are used to building crews globally, internationally on the ground. So I think that is something that has really shifted, and COVID maybe had an impact on that as well. But that's been a really positive shift, because I think a few years ago, achieving the creative was almost worth not hitting your sustainability goals. And I don't think that that's really acceptable now. I don't think anyone would. I think that's really changed, which is great. You know, I think we're all now very used to that behavioral shift that means that actually it is a priority and it is possible to do it alongside hitting your creative and delivering for your clients.
Wow. Well, I mean, that's amazing to see that sort of mind shift or sort of cultural change, and fascinating to dig into or get the exposure to the content creation side of things. I think as a media and programmatic advertising person, it's not a part of the industry I necessarily have a huge amount of exposure to. I wonder, Manu, I saw you nodding through a lot of that. Have you seen a similar shift in the media contact mindset from the brand perspective?
So for us, super interesting to see all the great changes that are happening on the creative side, which is part of some of the business that I manage and I love. So if we look at the way, so I'm very fortunate to be in a role where I see a lot of innovation, and I talk with a lot of companies when it comes to innovation. And for me, what we are doing, we are fostering that culture, that mindset of sustainability when it comes to innovation. And that has been a shift that I've seen in the last few years now. Before, yes, as you say, we are an industry of magpies. We jump on the next shiny thing, which is true. But now we look, okay, what is the sustainable angle that we can take? And we really factor and ask for credential around sustainability to every partner we work with. Perhaps one example that I can talk about is the way we buy media and our responsible investment framework, which now includes sustainability. So alongside, for example, we implemented an approach to media buy that includes 5 key priorities. So from D&I to brand safety, data ethics, support responsible journalism, but now sustainability and carbon emission is now included in the way we approach media.
I love that. And that, I mean, all of those elements effectively are adding up, similarly to how we approach this index to effectively efficiency across your working media, right?
Exactly, yes. So it becomes more efficiency, but also we know that there is a strong correlation between quality and carbon emissions as well.
Paolo, Tim, I've seen you nodding through what Manu was sharing. Is there something you'd love to add on that sort of that balance of new technology, new and shiny thing with the sustainability goals? Like, how do you think about that?
I think hindsight's probably a wonderful thing. Katie, you've worked in programmatic for a long time. I have as well. And I think when advertising technology started proliferating, all we saw was the upside of yield and targeting and performance for advertisers and precision and reach and everything, without thinking about this huge carbon challenge, which we've all created and now we all have to clean up. We're now at a point where when we go into understanding new technologies, and AI is a good example, we can have that front of mind in terms of the environmental impact of that. Like, it's already well known in terms of the challenges that AI is causing from an environmental perspective. And it's really about having the frameworks and perhaps checks and balances in place as you think about rolling this out across your organization. It's not that AI is bad. Like, AI is the most profound technology of our time, will have a huge impact on us as a human race, but it's how do you use it effectively across your organization to make sure that it's worth the carbon. So I could create 1 million iterations of a creative tomorrow and use 3 of them. That's a terrible waste of carbon. But in Helen's world, I could use a small AI tool in post-production and have a huge saving on overheads and costs and travel and everything else. That's an incredible use of AI. So I think it's just understanding where you're using it from an effectiveness perspective. And then back to the measurement point, we already starting to get the tools now where we can understand the size of that. So I think it's important that we do this at the beginning versus going back and trying to solve the challenge afterwards.
So effectively, by having good measurement, you can kind of weigh the cost and figure out, is it worth it? Is it going to have a meaningful impact? Now, I promised our audience at the beginning that we would make this very actionable and concrete. So I'm going to ask my panelists now for concrete examples, please, of how sustainability has been successfully integrated into your advertising campaigns, and perhaps what were the key factors for the success of doing so. So Paolo, is that something you might be able to start us off with? Like, how have you been integrating sustainability, and what's been driving that success?
Okay, it's been a great challenge for us at the beginning because, of course, there is always the question from the publisher side. So if we're going to invest maybe some our resources or revenues into a specific product that help us to compensate our emission, how could it work? Is it completely reliable? So we decided to approach it in a sort of reverse engineering process. So starting from a campaign, we had a great work with Trentino South Tirol in Italy, that is a regional promotion association strongly connected to ethical approach to the tourism, natural and outdoor experiences from winter sport to summer vacation. And they were looking for trusted media partners to run a programmatic campaign with the mandatory request to activate players with a specific carbon emission compensation system. So I decided to use it as an internal way to push the approach of the technology. And then thanks to Index and Scope, we had the chance to integrate our strategy with a concrete solution to deliver 100% sustainable campaigns. And the consistency then with the editorial strategy and the technical solution adopted, I think it's a key factor for us in terms of proposition to the client. I do believe that clients play a crucial role because they always help us and just like, let me say it, push provider to work on sustainable solutions. So it's very important, as I said at the beginning, to build a system. It's a cooperating system between the brands, the agencies, and then the publisher, because we are a part of overall market that needs to work together.
Yes, that collaboration has been really, really key, and it's nice that I love that you would use one brand as a springboard to be able to then repeat this as well and drive this internally. Are there perhaps other concrete examples from our other panelists who might be able to build on Paolo's experience?
Perhaps a different, slightly different angle, but our Essence Mediacom team won a very nice Ad Net Zero award in 2023 for a Sainsbury's campaign. So Sainsbury's as an advertiser, has been very much focused on sustainability. So they've been very, very focused on that. And we took the opportunity to include media decarbonization as part of the plan. And the approach that we took was quite simple, considering that I work in the programmatic space. So we took...
It can be complicated.
So we took a three-step approach for the client, but the first one was about improving on our supply path. So be stricter in the SPO and reducing those hop and have a more direct access to supply. So clean up, let's say, the way we operate. The second step was about targeting lower carbon emission placements for the campaign. And the third step was implementing energy efficient creative execution within the campaign. So the results were very positive since the beginning, because within the first 3 months of the campaign, we saw a decrease in terms of carbon emission of about 38%, and then went up also. I think it ended up in 56% by the end of the year. But also what we saw is that quality matters. And there was a good correlation between results and cost per acquisition for the clients and the media we were buying. And therefore, we experienced a 36% decrease in cost per acquisition for Sainsbury, which was huge. And one of the other aspect of the campaign that I thought it was interesting is also we had a reinvestment opportunity with the clients. So the money saved was actually reinvested towards carbon reducing practices within the UK farming industry, but also to support and improve on the supply chain for Sainsbury itself. So I think there was a good full cycle for this campaign.
I love to hear that. And Manu, I'm going to, if I can, play back those 3 steps, because I think you shared you were looking at what creative you were running, you were running it, and how it was getting there. And it was those 3 steps that drove down the carbon reduction and improved the performance of the campaign effectively.
Yeah, definitely. And these are 3 steps that we are actually implemented in our practice on a daily basis. And I think everybody in the industry could potentially work on.
I think this is fantastic. I feel like I could keep this conversation going for absolutely hours, because it's fascinating and it's so good to come together to share best practice. But I am conscious of time, and I'm conscious again that we promise these actionable insights. So I would love it if I can ask each of my panelists now to share one thing that everyone who's dialed in for this webinar, or everyone who's watching it played back afterwards as they're eating their lunch or going about their day, and I would love to ask everyone to share what is one thing that everybody here could do that would make a real impact if we put it in place today. I'm going to ask, maybe Tim, can I call on you first this time?
You can, yeah. So I think probably in our personal lives, all of us make sustainable choices every day. So that's just something we do. I think we all feel we have to, and it's the right thing to do. Like you discussed earlier, in marketing, we're all lucky enough to be working in an industry where it doesn't matter what role you work in, you can change things from an environmental perspective. So I think it's, if you'd asked folks, like I said, to do this 12 months ago, I think it would have been hard. To ask them to do it now, I think everyone on this call, in this room, that you work within this industry has the opportunity to do it. So it's maybe a kind of call to action. By the end of the year, make sure that the client you're working with, the technology you're working with, whatever choices you are making, because you have that influence, make a sustainable choice and have something that you can kind of tangibly hold on to and are proud of. If you're struggling with ideas, please reach out to me and I'd be happy to consult you on it. But I don't think there's one person working within our industry that doesn't have the ability to do that. And we've spent so long talking about it. Now's the time we can actually really action that. So by the time you get to your New Year's resolutions, make sure that you have something tangible and that you've made a start on it.
Perfect. Thank you. I love that. Commit to doing something now. Helen, would you like to go next?
Sure. I would say if there's one thing I think the majority of the businesses that people joining from work for will be able to do is to start measuring your emissions. The Add Green Carbon Calculator is an incredible tool. If you're measuring with mitigation over offset in mind, so we're always trying to reduce carbon before we offset it. And I think with a backdrop of optimism, really, I think as Tim just touched on, we are all accustomed now generally to the huge role that big corporations play in the fight against climate change. And as advertisers and people working with those big brands, we do have an incredible opportunity to steer the conversation and change behavior. So I would say start measuring and feel optimistic.
Love that. Paolo, from your perspective?
I come back from the first answer I gave you, and I think that it's important to make a system between all the markets. So start speaking about sustainability like a trend, but act like a fact. So maybe cooperation between the whole industry, it's a key point to start together and working seriously on this kind of topic.
We've certainly found that at Index Exchange. It's through our partnerships and through our partners that we've really been able to make progress. So thank you for reiterating that message. And Manu, from your perspective?
And last one, I am going to go back to behavioral changes. And for me, I will say clean up your inbox. So we see that there is a lot of, well, you can reduce your carbon footprint by simply clean up your inbox, get rid of all your junk email, get rid of all the newsletter that you don't read. And actually, we did it for Earth Day. We did a little event during lunch and learn session where we all focus on tips on how to clean up your inbox, and you reduce your carbon footprint, but also you improve your productivity. So that's my tip.
I'm going to take that at Index Exchange, and we're going to do something across our EMEA organization this month on that. I will commit to that. I think that's a brilliant one. Thank you very much for sharing. I know we are very tight on time, so I will hand back to Helen from the IAB, but I'd just like to say a huge thank you to all of the panelists today who've, I think, done what we said we would do around really making this actionable.
I completely agree with you, Katie. That was such a great session. And yeah, well done to yourself, the presentation, to all of the panelists that's joined. I've just put a link into IAB Europe Sustainability Hub because I saw that there was one question just about measurement tools. IAB Europe, we recently released a guide to the different measurement tools out there. So it's really good. So please do go and check out the hub. And then in the spirit of emails, I was going to say we're going to email this recording to everyone that signed up, and I feel absolutely guilty. So we're going to try and see what we can do to make sure that we minimize the amount of emails that we have going around. Before we go, just a quick reminder, we've got a couple of other events that are coming up, and this is why it's amazing to do these virtual events. We don't need to all travel. We can connect together online and do this. So it's really great. But our next one is our virtual programmatic day. Now, this is actually a hybrid event in Berlin, but it still means that people can join us virtually from across Europe. So it's taking place on the 6th of November. We've got some amazing topics that we'll be discussing. There's a QR code so people can register for that. And then finally, I think we had one else, the great debate, trust and transparency. So I think we're going to be talking about sustainability, AI, all of those really key topics, and how we are tackling those, trying to instill trust in these new developments and transparency. So again, the QR code is there. But we are bang on time. So a big thank you again to Katie and all of the panelists. Really, really appreciated you giving up your time and expertise to share this with all of us. And of course, to everyone else for dialing in and joining us live. We look forward to seeing you at our next event. Thank you so much, everyone. Bye-bye. Cheers.